standards and right education system.
I'm the former Frankie.
Of the Northwest Pass, we really need somebody different.
Your career, you're used to winning. Life, it was everything to us.
7 or 8 weeks of two-a-days.
They really made me appreciate
We're allowed to win.
he was coming in and would be shooting the whole time.
Let's go back real quick to the Enid Walk of Fame.
Of course, we have training in confined space.
Legitimate, maybe to know a little more.
A good safety tip on that, Steve.
Putting a hat on and getting out there and doing the job.
The television model that you watched growing up.
Houston, this is the International Space Station.
City Connections begins right now.
Hello and welcome to City Connections. I'm Steve Keim and I have the privilege of serving as the Director of Public Relations and Marketing for the City of Enid and also the Director of the Enid Television Network. And with that role, I have the real privilege of meeting individuals that grew up in Enid, went to high school in Enid, they left for a while, and then they come back and kind of fill us in on the blank on what's been going on the last 10, 20, 30, even 50 years. And my special guest today, Wood-Schultz, is a 1964 graduate of Enid High School. He's a plainsman. He's back in Enid, Oklahoma. Rod, welcome to the Enid Television Network.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today, and I'm looking forward to this visit. And I try to do a lot of research on our guests. Be honest, couldn't find a whole lot about you, so I'm just going to wing some of this today. But I know some of the key important things is that you grew up in Enid or graduated from Enid in '64. Right. Go back to that time. What was it like in Enid in the mid-'60s?
Well, I did grow up here. I went to, I was going to say K through 12, but back then there was no K.
That's
but
right.
all 12 years of school here in Enid.
Junior high, then high school.
Yeah, Adams Grade School, Longfellow Junior High, and then
Okay.
Enid High School. My dad worked at Union Equity at the grain elevator.
Okay.
And so that's how I got to be here now.
One of the reasons that we're having this sit-down visit today, Rod, is to talk about the observatory at Enid High School. Tell us about your experiences I guess the early days of your experience with the observatory.
I believe, I didn't know it at the time, but I believe the observatory was only a year old when I was a senior at Enid High. Okay. And I had Jim Smeltzer, who was my physics teacher, and he got us interested in doing astronomy and astronomical projects. I did a science fair project using the observatory and the telescope that it had then. Took pictures of the moon and used the shadows to determine the heights of the lunar features and things like that. And it was a lot of fun to do, and Jim Smeltzer was really an inspiration and got me really interested in science at the time.
You just recently, before we got involved in our conversation, mentioned about the 50th high school reunion. Let's go back to that. It was a couple years ago. Yeah. What type of experience was that? 50 years later, seeing all the people.
50 years later, right. So the 2014 in September, we had our 50th high school reunion and had a really good time. Got to see a lot of friends. I'd been to maybe the 10 and 20, but I hadn't been back in a while. And as a part of that, Jim Mabry, who was in my class, organized a tour of the high school. And I saw all of the improvements it had made. There's a wing that's been built that wasn't there when I went to school. The outside still looks pretty much the same, but the inside's really been redone very nicely. And I noticed they had named some of the rooms after teachers I had. There's a math room named after Mary Evelyn Adams, who was one of my teachers. And oh, by the way, I just read in the Enid newspaper that she turned 85 on February 20th. Wow. So congratulations to her. Yeah. But talking to her at the banquet, I found out that Jim Smeltzer had passed away. And so at the time, I was already trying to think of ways to honor him and see if we could get the observatory where it was in good shape again. And
let's talk a little bit more again about yourself, but on the academic topic, if we will. Mm-hmm. You graduated from Oklahoma State, went over to Stillwater, right. Your master's from the University of Colorado. Then you went on to get a doctorate as well at the University of Colorado.
That's
tell
correct.
us, before your career kicked into gear, tell us a little bit about the University of Colorado, the academic work there.
Okay, so when I got to graduate school there, I decided to do a thesis where I was using a large solar telescope in Sunspot, New Mexico, to this time taking pictures of the sun instead of the moon. Turns out that's easier. You don't have to stay up late at night, do daytime astronomy. And so I did that for my thesis research, and then graduated in '74 from University of Colorado and took a job at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, where I ended up working full-time for 30-something years, and then after retiring, working part-time in consulting for that laboratory.
So you're in page 2 of your professional career.
Right.
Rod, a lot of individuals have heard of Los Alamos, excuse me, and you know, the laboratory that's out there, the National Laboratory. They've heard of the phrase, they've heard of the term, they know it's west or whatever in New Mexico, but can you kind of give us a 20-word or less answer of what the National Laboratory is all about?
Well, I think most people are aware that's where the Manhattan Project was in World War II,
Right.
and developed the first atomic bombs. And the lab still does an awful lot of work in that area in national security, but they've branched out and do a lot of other things too these days. Turns out that I worked in the nuclear weapons program at Los Alamos for my career, and so you said you weren't able to find a lot about me. There's probably not a lot out there to find. It was a very interesting career and a very interesting area to work in.
How did you make the leap, if you will, with your doctorate from the University of Colorado to New Mexico?
Okay. Well, it turns out when you study the stars, there's a lot of the physics that goes on in stellar processes that are the same that go on in nuclear weapons, especially thermonuclear weapons. So there's a lot of overlap. You know, they certainly don't teach you how to do weapons work in college, but a lot of the basic physics that you learn is applicable when you then get into that area.
Well, one of the key reasons that we're having this discussion today is your involvement as a friend of the observatory. Tell us, you told us a little bit of that during the high school reunion, the 50th reunion, you got the tour of the school's facility, but you didn't get to see the observatory, correct?
That's correct.
But you've heard of this new endeavor, this new project to restore, rebuild, get another telescope and kind of not remodel, but just to restore the observatory. So how did you hear about it, and what is your involvement today?
Okay, so I started calling around and got in touch with a person named Rick Hockmeyer, who's a science teacher at Enid High today, and he told me that there was some efforts going on that Rick and Nancy had started to try to get the observatory back into good shape. And I exchanged some emails with them. Tim asked me to send him some information about what it was like to have Smeltzer for a teacher, and I did that. and then he told me they were starting this effort to have Friends of the Observatory to try to refurbish it.
And excuse me, let me interject. When Rod was talking about Tim and Nancy, he was referring to Tim Gregg, who is a high school graduate of Enid High School.
In '74.
In '74,
Right.
a few years later, 10 years later,
Right.
and also married to Dr. Nancy Currie-Gregg, the astronaut that we've had on a previous edition of City Connection. Sorry to interrupt, but just wanted to make that connection. And
that's fine.
And so
anyway, I sent him an email and said, you know, I want to be a friend of the observatory, and anything I can do to help, please let me know. He told me about the dedication that's happening today, and so I said, I'd like to come. So I drove yesterday all the way back from to Enid from Los Alamos, and gonna participate in the dedication this evening.
our special guest today on City Connections is Rod Wood-Schultz, a '64 graduate of Enid High School, Plainsman, and back in Enid, Oklahoma to support the observatory effort, and as a friend of the observatory. Rod, as individuals we're going to show this interview for the next several weeks, and somebody's watching this and they go, man, I haven't seen Rod in a long time. He hadn't changed a bit.
Yeah. Actually, I think I have changed quite a bit. When I was in high school, I was real skinny, and I certainly didn't have a gray beard. So.
Well, the second thing they may say is that, well, he hadn't changed a bit, but the second thing is, maybe he ought to be a friend of the observatory. What would be your word to a classmate or just an individual that's watching the show today? How can they get involved, and why should they get involved?
Well, my class and for the next two classes, my brother graduated in '67, and he was the last in the last class that had Smeltzer, and he had him for both astronomy and physics. So there's that 3-year period that people actually had Jim Smeltzer for an instructor. And I think anybody that had him understands why it's important to try to do this in his memory.
And I think we've all can relate, even in Perry, Oklahoma, we can relate to educators, mentors, individuals that really spoke to our hearts and our mind, if you will, and really encourage us to pursue dreams and things of this nature. And last question in our visit is, I want to give you the platform, you know, to speak to classmates that are, or is there anything else that we need that we haven't discussed about the observatory? Because people are going to think, well, that's, you know, that thing is 50-some years old or even longer than that.
Well,
what's the significance for today? Why do we keep it alive?
It needs a lot. I found out that the telescope that's in the observatory today is 50 years old. So one of the things we want to do, besides getting the observatory dome and everything working well mechanically again, is get some new equipment to put in it. I'm an amateur astronomer and never was a professional astronomer, but I have a large telescope of 11-inch celestron, and so Tim actually asked me to help him come up with a list of equipment for the observatory, and I've done that. You know, if we can get enough money to buy all that equipment, it's going to be a first-class observatory, especially for a high school. I mean, it's the only one in Oklahoma, and it's going to be as good as a lot of the colleges have.
And it can still be the only one in Oklahoma with a unique touch.
Indeed.
And I believe the website is WeWillFindStars.Space. I believe that's the email address. It's close to that. WeWillFindStars.Space.
I think that's right.
Rod Wood-Schultz. Rod, thank you for taking time to be with us today here at the Enid Television Network studios, and appreciate your contribution. I imagine there's a teacher watching and said, well, Rod turned out pretty good after all.
Yeah, in spite of what they thought.
In spite of what they thought. Well, again, thanks for joining us. Came all the way from New Mexico to be with us on City Connections, and we appreciate Rod Wood-Schultz. And we appreciate you for joining us on City Connections today. I'm Steve Keim with the City of Enid. Until next time, make it a great day.